So we're going to go to Bev from LGB Alliance, Bev Jackson, also incredibly inspiring, and having just sort of got a niche and created an amazing organisation which has inspired people all over the world and made massive, significant change in a reasonably short time, just a few years, has changed the face of this fight. So thank you so much, Bev, for coming along, and over to you.
Kate Harris and I founded LGB Alliance in October 2019, having tried for several years to get Stonewall to listen to the way in which their embrace of gender identity was having this very, very harmful effect on gay people, bisexual people, and particularly on lesbians. Particularly on lesbians, I want to emphasize that it's not by no means a coincidence that LGB Alliance was founded by two lesbians. Our chief executive, Kate Barker, is a lesbian, and also the chair of trustees, Eileen Gallagher, OBE, is also a lesbian, and we've always had a tremendous emphasis. It's so important to understand that. We do feel that what we did by setting up LGB Alliance, we are the only registered charity that campaigns exclusively for people who are attracted to others of the same sex. Certainly in the UK and possibly in the world, I'm not sure about that, but as a registered charity. As you know, our charitable status is being has been challenged by mermaids funded by a barrister. And that court case, which was heard in court last September, and then with the last 2 days of closing statements in November last year, we are still waiting for the judgment. So I cannot say anything about it. I know everybody wants to hear, and so do we. And obviously, we're still very much hoping that that judgment will come soon. But I cannot say anything about that court case. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to do so. And it has meant, of course, that because of the court case, that has slowed down our activities somewhat. We cannot, for instance, apply for funding for the helpline. That this is our major project, one of our major projects, which is to have a helpline for young LGB people. At the moment, gender identity has subsumed everything. Every child who has some problem that they say is related to gender, it's assumed to be a gender identity thing, and that means that a lot of young teenagers are who may be struggling with their sexual orientation are led to believe through all sorts of sources online and at school, peers and so on, to think that they've got a gender identity issue and to go down the gender transition route. So we very much are looking forward to setting up our helpline, which will be manned or womaned exclusively by LGB people. And once the we hope soon that our charitable status will be confirmed, and we can go ahead with that. We have other plans. Of course, we are building up an LGB history archive and a student network. We have many other, and we have a major conference every year at the QE2 Centre in October. The webinars from that, or I should say the panel discussions from that, are online, and you can see them on our YouTube channel. I'd like to start actually by talking about Victor Madrigal-Borloz. I think everybody knows that Victor Madrigal-Borloz is the so-called independent, so-called expert. It's a bit rude, but I do think that's rather appropriate for sexual orientation and gender identity. As you know, he's been in office at the United Nations since 2017. And it's become more and more clear that he is only interested in gender identity, and not only ignores the sexual orientation part of his task, but actually actively works against it. Because, and I had an article in The Critic about this yesterday, and I would invite you to read also what happened when we met him. So Victor recently came to the UK, and he's nearing the end of his term. He came to the UK on an official visit, and he met mainly with other gender identity enthusiasts. As Tish, the redoubtable researcher, has discovered, he is funded by the Arcus Foundation, and that means that he is I have called him a paid mouthpiece for gender identity. I don't think that's unfair, because he doesn't seem to grasp the different predicament of people who are attracted to the same sex and how they are disadvantaged by this emphasis on gender identity, and particular self-ID. And Victor goes around the world saying that self-ID is required by international law. That's absolute nonsense. He also keeps saying that we're in all the countries that have self-ID, there's never been any problems. I mean, that is so completely absurd. We've sent him so many examples of abuses in prisons, and of course in refuges, and in sport, and in particular lesbian spaces and young lesbians, as I've just said, being impacted particularly by this huge surge in teenage girls seeking to go on testosterone, have their breasts removed and so on, which in the United States, where it's very heavily commercial thing, happens at a very young age. Anyway, so we wanted to bring these things to his attention, and he eventually did agree to meet with us, including, he originally planned to meet right at the end of his visit with all the women's groups that had asked to meet with him, and the three lesbian and gay groups, which were LGB Alliance and the Gay Men's Network and Lesbian Labour. And we made a case for having a separate meeting for those three groups, and we eventually had that. It was quite a hostile meeting, because especially with Kate Harris for LGB Alliance, we have reason to believe that Victor is not particularly interested in our arguments, since we've been making them politely for years, and he simply ignores them or pretends that he doesn't know. It's quite important. Tanya's referred to the rights of the child. Victor seems to be suggesting that it is a right of the child to, as she says, bodily autonomy. Whenever you hear that phrase, bodily autonomy, you have to realize that this is a direct attack on child safeguarding. And so I totally agree with what Tanya says about that, and we must resist that. And also at the UN, CEDAW, which is the only convention left which still refers to sex-based rights, there are people at the United Nations trying to change that to gender. Anyway, we have tried to highlight the way in which Victor is working against the rights of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, and only trying to push through self-ID with a lot of things which are not true. And I would invite everybody else to do so, please, from within your own country. Apparently, he says he has nobody sends him examples. Well, send him personal examples, please do, of ways in which self-ID disadvantages women and lesbians in particular. Please send him these examples, because if only sending them in terms of general rules apparently doesn't work. I'm not at all sure that sending him personal examples will work anyway, but please do so that the evidence is there, so that you can show that you have provided this evidence. I would hope that everybody would do that. So that is Victor. Victor's due to produce another report in June. One thing that's been suggested is that you could beforehand look at the terms of that report and suggest the questions you hope it would answer, and then grade him on those afterwards. That's also a good idea. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster in the UK. We've had various universities try to stop events that they didn't like. We've had, and in particular, Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh. And then Joanna Cherry was invited to take part at an event at the Stand in Edinburgh, and then she was uninvited because the staff didn't like her, presumably didn't gender critical views. And Joanna sent them a very, very long legal letter, and that made it very clear that she was in the right. They were guilty of direct discrimination, and they had to apologize. And now she's been re-invited to take part in that event. And of course, Joanna wasn't doing this for herself. She was doing it on behalf of all those other people who are constantly, other women who are constantly being no platformed So this was a really important and successful move by her. In Scotland, we're waiting for two different things. We're waiting for, you know, that the Gender Recognition Reform Bill has been blocked by Westminster because it would interfere with the Equality Act, and we're waiting for the judicial review on that. And we're also waiting for the challenge to Lady Haldane's ruling, which was that sex is legal sex rather than biological sex. In Westminster, we're going to be having the Equality and Human Rights Commission has called for the word sex to be defined clearly in the Equality Act as biological sex. This caused a huge outcry, and this has yet to be resolved, and we're hoping very much that it will be resolved in that way, and that will further cement the rights of women under the Equality Act, and also the rights of lesbians, because sexual orientation is a sex-based right as well. LGB Alliance has called for a public inquiry. In fact, Tanya also called for a public inquiry. We really need a public inquiry into how we have reached the state at which the whole discourse on sex and gender has become distorted throughout all institutions in UK society. And I would encourage people in other countries too to call for a public inquiry how is it possible that rights which have been built up so carefully over decades are being undermined in the name of what? What we do believe that LGB Alliance has had a very, very particular role, not just in inspiring lots and lots of other LGBT groups around the world, but in disrupting the narrative, or we could say tearing up the script. What was the script until LGB Alliance came along? The script was, if you disagreed with gender identity, you were homophobic. Well, and then we came along, and I think that is why there was so much fury directed at us, because we showed, no, sorry, there's plenty of lesbians and gays and bisexuals who do not subscribe to gender identity theory, who do not want self-ID. And so people, it made it possible for people who disapproved of gender identity theory or saw the risks that it posed, they were able to say so. It made it easier for them to say so without being accused of homophobia. So we do think that we've played quite a key role, and that is probably why all the accusations are constantly leveled at us, and we're called all sorts of names. And unfortunately, we're used to being called names. And in fact, everybody who these days promotes sex-based rights is called so many horrible names that we almost think it sort of confirms that those who oppose us have no arguments. All they can do is call us horrible names. I want to draw attention to the GenSpect conference because, as you know, GenSpect, led mainly by Stella O'Malley, decided to have a conference in Ireland at the same time and in the same town as EPATH, which is the European part of WPATH. And whereas EPATH is very much pro-medicalization of kids with gender dysphoria, GenSpect is highly critical of it, and a very open organization exploring all the various social and psychological aspects around this issue, and encouraging people to think critically, which is not something that is terribly common in EPATH or in WPATH. I would encourage you very much to look at their videos also, which are now online. That was just last week, that event. And what they said, what Stella said at a key moment in that conference was, it's really important to explain to people that being gay and being trans are two different things. They've been stuck together in this LGBTQ XYZ collection of letters, or at the United Nations as SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. By putting them together, the public has been completely confused and thinks that this is all the same sort of thing. It's really important to emphasize to everybody you speak to and in the letters that you write Now, I would, yes, encourage everybody to write letters, write to your school, for instance, about the material that Tanya's been talking about. Write to your member of parliament, especially if you've got stories to tell them that bring it to life for them. If you start saying sex and gender issues, people's eyes glaze over. But as soon as you say, my sister did this, and then now she's my brother, and actually, I don't know what's going on, and my parents can't cope. And if you give people personal stories that they find easier to relate to, this seems to work better than keeping things on the general level. So I would very much encourage people to do that. Talk to the people around you, and do dare to speak up, because every day you hear someone say, oh, I didn't really dare to speak to so and so, and then I did, and they said, oh, I totally agree with you. Just yesterday, or was it today, we saw for the first time a Democratic member of Congress speaking up in favor of raising the age of any kind of medicalization to 18. This is very, very brave for a Democrat to do, because, as you know, in the United States, it's incredibly polarized. So encourage, when you see someone like that in a position of leadership, speaking out, do encourage them, support them, show that they are not alone, because these people are often attacked mercilessly, and they really welcome the support they get from others. So everybody can play their own role, as Kate and I said in at the end of our speeches at our conference in October. Everybody can play their own particular role. Think of your own strengths, think of your positions. How can you move this conversation further and break down what's happened, which is a really pernicious attack on the rights of women and LGB people? Join together. If there isn't an LGB group in your country, maybe you could set one up. You can contact us to see if we know anybody there. And I just wish you all, I'm so happy that this webinar exists. I think it's a powerful place for women, and I'm really happy to be here.